Recording in progress.
Okay, it looks like welcome everyone. I am joined today by Krista Murphy, who is part of our West Ed team. Karen Bloomer had a conflict for the day, so Krista has been an understudy in waiting. So Krista will help with today's meeting, and I'm delighted to have her with us here. So Krista, can I turn it over to you, and I will share a screen to get us started with the various housekeeping for today's meeting.
Great, thank you, Janelle. Good morning, everyone, and welcome. Before we begin today's meeting, we'd like to orient you to a couple of our Zoom protocols. Today's meeting will be supported using the closed caption feature in Zoom. To access the closed captioning feature, please locate the live transcript button at the bottom of your participant panel, and then click Show Subtitle. This will allow you to view closed captions in English throughout the entire meeting. If you prefer to not have closed captions, simply do not click Show Subtitles. At any point during today's meeting, you can re-click this button and it will turn off that feature. Before I turn things over to our interpreters, I want to remind everyone who speaks today to please use a moderate tone and a moderate pace so that our interpreters can keep up. And with that, I will turn things over to our interpreters to describe how you can listen to today's meeting in English, Spanish, and Mandarin.
Good morning, everyone, and welcome to this meeting. My name is Giovanna Wormsbecker, and I'll be one of your Spanish interpreters. In order to provide language access, this meeting will have simultaneous bidirectional interpretation from English to Spanish and Mandarin. Please note that the translation globe will not appear until after I've read through all language instructions. Therefore, we're asking that everyone joining us for this event, please select your preferred language to facilitate hearing presenters and participants clearly, and to prevent technical glitches or interference with occurring between the three language channels when one is not selected. If you're on a laptop, please locate the icon shaped like a globe at the bottom of your screen. Click on Language Interpretation and then select English. If you're on an iPad or your phone or a similar device, then locate the three-dot menu on the right corner of your screen. Click on Language Interpretation and then select English. When you speak, please do so at a moderate pace because the interpreter is going to be simultaneously interpreting everything you say. Buenos días a todos y bienvenidos a esta reunión. Mi nombre es Giovanna Wormsbecker y seré una de sus intérpretes en español. Esta reunión contará con interpretación simultánea bidireccional en inglés, español y mandarín. El globo de traducción no va a aparecer hasta que haya leído las instrucciones en inglés, español y mandarín. Por lo tanto, pedimos que todos los presentes seleccionen su idioma preferido para facilitar escuchar a los presentadores y participantes con claridad, evitando que se produzcan fallas técnicas o interferencias entre los tres canales lingüísticos cuando uno no sea seleccionado. Si está usando una computadora, verá un icono en la parte inferior de su pantalla a la derecha en forma de globo que dice Interpretación. Haga clic ahí y seleccione Español. Si está utilizando un iPad o teléfono, localice el menú de 3 puntos que aparece arriba a la derecha, haga clic en Interpretación de idiomas y seleccione Español. Cuando sea su turno de hablar, por favor recuerde hablar con voz fuerte y clara y a un paso moderado, ya que la intérprete estará interpretando simultáneamente el otro idioma. Now I will turn things over to our Mandarin interpreter. Thank you.
大家早上好，欢迎参加本次会议。我的名字是 Sarah， 我和亚楠是今天的普通话翻译。为了提供语言服务，本次会议将提供从英语翻译为西班牙语和普通话的双向同声传译。请注意，在我们读完英文、西班牙文和中文说明之后，翻译频道的地球图案才会出现。为了避免为选择语言频道而导致技术性故障或干扰，我们要求参加本次活动的每个人，请从3种语言中选择您想听的语言，以便清楚地听到发言者和与会者的声音。如果您使用的是笔记本电脑，请在屏幕底部找到一个地球形状的图标后，点击语言翻译，然后选择英语或普通话 Mandarin。如果您使用的是 iPad 或手机或类似设备，请找屏幕右上角的3点，点击语言翻译，然后选择英语或普通话 Mandarin。当您发言时，请放慢速度，让口译员能够同步翻译您所说的所有内容。谢谢。Thank you.
Thank you. We will now enable interpretation and live transcripts. Please make sure to select your appropriate language. Janelle, I think we're ready for you to begin.
Okay, thank you, Krista, and welcome back, everyone. I feel like we said at the beginning of this, we'd meet every month, and it turns out we are meeting every week. So I think I counted up. I think this is the 9th meeting we've had, and we're really, I think, making significant progress, particularly as we've started to work through how to put together the structures of a rate, what needs to go into it, how we attend to equity, what that means for children outcomes, what that means for provider needs and outcomes, families is what we heard last time. So today, what we're going to focus on is taking stock of where are we along this path so that we can identify very clearly what are the remaining gaps we have to fill so that we're moving closer towards having a draft of the report. So our goal here is getting some of your final input that will help us put together the draft that at our early July meeting, I believe it's July 7th or 8th, we'll get together and we'll be able to review that draft, getting closer to meeting then what becomes the final report that will be issued in August. So that is the game plan for the day or the morning. Before I start though, just wanted to pause and see, are there any announcements, updates from workgroup members that you'd like to share before we begin? So Eric Peterson, seeing your hand.
Good morning, everybody. I just got off a statewide call with Child Care Aware this morning, and as many of you may or may not know, the child care funding is not in the reconciliation package by Congress. So I would just urge you, because that directly affects the work we're doing in this work group, which is the funding portion, is to contact your local representative and urge them to put child care back in the reconciliation package. We need that money for a number of reasons. It's been 50 years since we've tried to get any child care money and we were turned down back then. So let's get our voices out there. We only have a couple days. Thanks.
Thanks, Eric. Any other updates or announcements for the work group before? Okay, so let's just get right on into things then. I'm gonna go back to sharing my screen and just set us up here with a bit of kind of recounting ourselves and where we are and what we're doing next. And I just wanted to start, we started our first few meetings revisiting the statute. And I think as we're getting closer to the final report, remembering what are the components of the charge for this work group as a means to both reflect on what we've been able to work on and accomplish, and then what is the remaining work for us to do. So, first charge was assess the methodology for establishing a reimbursement rate and existing standards for childcare and development preschool programs for equity and accessibility that reflects all provider types and settings. So this has been, the bulk of what we've done has been really talking about what's happening with rates, what do we need to see, what's the methodology, and really quite significantly, this group determining that, moving from a price-based to a cost-based system is critical as we're thinking about how to make reimbursement rates address the needs of our educators and providers and parents, families, and children. The next piece here in the statute was providing that assessment and recommendations that are research-based. So we've heard over the course of these many months, a number of experts and researchers, including regularly from P5, who's again here to join us today, but we've heard from Carlise King at Child Trends, we've heard from the Advancement Project, we've heard from Parent Voices. We've had a number of opportunities to hear from experts to bring forward the research and allow us to then reflect on that to come up with our recommendations. So, and the other thing that I think we've been clearly talking about is throughout every conversation, how to think about the diversity and issues of equity. We've touched on, and I would say have a little bit ways to go with the alignment of all these systems, but that's something that's consistently come up as wanting to support and see how we align across the systems so that we're very thoughtful about equity. We're very thoughtful about how to make a system that is addressing some of the structural challenges, deficiencies that we've seen in the existing system. And then finally, recommendations ultimately going to help define or to the Department of Social Services that should define childcare workforce competencies and how these competencies should align with rate reform. And I know there has been some discussion about the use of terms around competencies. I'm just going to say this is a verbatim out of the statute. So the way we've talked about it as a group is, what do providers need? What are the ways that we reflect what providers do, how they've been engaged in training, in their building of expertise in what they do for children and families. So that's something that, again, has been asked for within the statute. So here's where this all comes together for us, right? Is we have introduced to you, based on taking your ideas, a visual framework that responds to these areas of the statute. And so what is here is the version that you've seen previously, and just sort of annotated it to say, how do we line back up with the statute? So the first piece is our rate and quality vision, which is the way the statute describes rate and quality vision that includes not only what the work group is contributing to, but also the Joint Labor Management Committee overall work on helping the state come up with a single reimbursement rate structure and what that means. And then this group has very much contributed to how do we talk about that with regard to values and guiding principles. So the 5 areas of values: equity, quality, child outcomes, workforce well-being, and accessibility. You have all contributed to the various bullets that are here describing how those values start to be materialized in the system that we expect, and then has led to the recommendations. So the first area of recommendations has to do with the single reimbursement rate structure, which I think the first part of that is moving towards having the alternative methodology that's using cost analysis. So this is that major shift from price to cost. Within that, then having and establishing a base rate, and also continuing to have evaluation of the model so that what is determined to be the costs of today evolve with the costs that come as we know more and things change in the system. So it's not enough to say we have done one model. We have to keep up with the model as we are keeping up with costs. I'll say the thing labeled number 3 is really the secondary recommendations, which are those system recommendations, which we spent a considerable amount of time talking about, which is for this to be successful, for us to have a single reimbursement rate structure, we have to have sustainable funding. So this is where there has to be revenue sources and ability to grow those sources to be able to sustain a commitment to a cost-driven model. We'll have to work through how to phase in this approach so that we're addressing the concepts or the principles of what we are prioritizing, how we're looking at equity and making sure that that's attended to. And then maximizing federal resources. So how do we take what's available and make sure that we're maximizing what we receive and it's being used in the most flexible way for us as a state? And then being sure to, in everything that is done, see the reference to equity, quality, child outcomes, and workforce well-being, that those are conditions that need to exist and need to be attended to. And then finally, the last 2 are related to alignment. So alignment with tribal programs and alignment with Head Start and related programs. And so most of these we've talked about at some length. A few of these we will have in this conversation today, as well as what's to come in the next couple of weeks, some additional time to work through. We had identified, and this was at the beginning of the month, a few topics that we needed to still discuss. We have agendized throughout this month these 5 topics. So the equity analysis rate structure was what we had with Carlise. We had Wendy join us from the Othering and Belonging Institute on Targeted Universalism, Whole Child, Whole Family, Parent and Family Voices. We had the Advancement Project and Parent Voices last week. And then with quality, we had introduced some of the what is information at the beginning of the month. And we have certainly had time to talk through that within the context of equity and including further comments as we talked about base rate. And then child outcomes, we had Peter Mangione come and talk to us about some broad definitions of how to think through applying child outcomes into a system. So those are all things that I would say our month has included as we've gone through and looked to how we were going to really solidify our recommendations in areas 1 and 3. And then a few things that have come up throughout our conversations in these past few months that I think we have addressed, but we also know there are structures outside of this that will further address these is, the first one is defining child care workforce companies. I think for this group, we have said if it is required to be part of licensure or permit, that should be included in the base rate. That's what we talked about last week. And so what I think that does for us is says, well, however and what we define in regards to the types of things people must or would have to know or do, we should fund those. I think that's how I would frame what I heard from this group based on the prior conversations. And there can be more done, but I think the statement is a strong one to say, and we expected that to be part of some kind of cost modeling in the future as there are changes in those areas. Second is continuous evaluation of implementation. So this is going to take time, and to do it well, we need to keep an eye on how it's working and making sure that it's attending to the various values that we're seeing that this work group has identified. Let me jump to number 4 and I'll come back to number 3. So implementation plan for targeting universalism. We've talked about how do you take those furthest from opportunity and bring them forward? What does that mean? What might that look like? We'll spend a little bit of time today talking through what that could look like in terms of how other systems have implemented change when it comes to introducing new funding structures, and want to hear from this group about what are your thoughts with regard to what that may take a form of as we put together these recommendations. And then the final one that I'll call out is evaluation of quality. So this is one that there are many things happening in the state with regard to quality. At times we've brought up, the measurement systems, the definitions, the supports that go with quality, and also the debates about how do we start to define, how do we start to assess, and who gets to decide that. I think this would be a great point to turn this over to Jackie Wong, who is I think I can still call you the new incoming director, executive director of First 5 California, because you've been really at the center. First 5 has been at the center of quite a bit of the work on QCC. And I wonder if in your capacity, you could talk about some of your, what you're doing in your new role and what you see as the landscape on quality and how that can help give this group an idea of what may be coming next and what you see happening. So Jackie, can I stop sharing and turn it over to you?
Yes, I was going to ask you to stop sharing so I can share, so we can play in the sandbox together. Thank you so much for the introduction and giving me the opportunity to present this morning. I know there are a lot of questions, and I just want to make sure, does everybody see my slides? Yes, no, thumbs up.
Yep.
Yes. Okay, great. Thank you. I actually have to acknowledge that I'm feeling some sort of way this morning. So if I'm a little bit more passionate in some points than others, please take this with some grace. So Jackie Tu Hung Wong, born Vu Tu Hung Wong, the new executive director here at First 5 California. And we really appreciate the opportunity to talk a little bit about our work in the quality area that is connected to our long-term investment of impact legacy. So Quality Counts California is what we have known to be California's quality rating and improvement systems. So just to provide you a little bit of background, QCC is making a difference in supporting the workforce to provide safe, stable, and nurturing relationship environments for children, kind of much more aligned with our North Star, as we've kind of been on this journey to ensure that we create systems that are trauma-informed, healing-centered, and culturally responsive. Specifically to that end, we serve approximately 8,500 sites and are now participating. 8,500 sites are now participating in QCC, and we're serving over 347,000 children. Sites participating in QCC include the full spectrum of early learning and care options, including family child care, family friend and neighbor caregivers, private centers, state preschool programs, and alternative settings like home visiting programs and family resource centers. Since the end of the federal Race to the Top grant was at the end, I believe, of 2015, which required sites to be rated, we have allowed a quality improvement only path, so not rating, not the R, for sites that don't wish to be rated. And over 43% of sites are not rated, but receive services like coaching and access to professional development. Funding from our QCC supports the early learning care workforce with coaching resources and other professional growth opportunities. And core focus areas include social emotional development, warm, responsive adult-child interactions, and family engagement strategies. During COVID, virtual coaching was a critical support to teachers and providers in order to keep environments safe for children and provide trauma-informed care. As many of you all know, when schools closed, a lot of our providers stopped, and so we leaned into this virtual option. To that end, we understand that QRIS has been in existence across California since 2012. Starting with the Race to the Top grant. While that funding helped to actually catalyze the creation of a quality improvement system, we acknowledge that QCC we have today is not the system that upholds our values, embraces our diversity, and provides equitable access for all. Right, we understand that this was built on top of systems that had embedded biases and structural racism. Right, we acknowledge that there are inequities in the system and that we need to specifically address the experiences and access for those who have been most marginalized through the systemic racism. So we have to do things differently. We have to acknowledge the history of this work and disrupt how we, when we disrupt the system, when we're talking about quality and what that could look like in this new reimagined world. In response to this understanding, and as suggested by the Master Plan for Early Learning and Care, First Five California is funding an equity audit intentionally of the QC system to actually, again, hear from the voices of community and really co-create a strategy that works for our community members and our providers. In partnership with CDSS and CDE, and through a contract with School Readiness Consulting, we are conducting extensive outreach to learn more about the experiences, needs, and gaps related to QCC on this journey with specificity about unpacking kind of the systemic racism embedded in our work. So we plan to conduct 42 focus groups in all areas of the state, including those on tribal lands and with tribal nations, with representation from teachers, administrators, family friend and neighbor, and family child care providers, and parents and families. These focus groups will be conducted in up to 6 languages, and will be inclusive of those who participate in QCC and those who currently aren't part of the system. We will disseminate the surveys broadly in up to 8 languages in both electronic and paper formats to gather data about current stakeholder experiences, as well as opportunities for enhancing equity for those already within the QCC system and those who might potentially benefit from QCC quality supports and resources. School Readiness Consulting will analyze the data from the focus groups and surveys and create a final report with recommendations with actionable stakeholder-oriented findings, takeaways, and recommendations. The outreach efforts will begin later this summer and recommendations will be complete by winter. So there's intentionality with our approach to where we'll be going with this QCC, this evolved iteration of QCC. Now I'm going to switch gears a little bit and tell you about what's next for First Five California and how Impact, which is actually our primary funding for QCC, what it's going to look like. I'm sure many of you are familiar with Impact 2020, but for those of you who may not be, I wanted to touch on it but just briefly. Impact 2020 is currently First Five California's largest program investment at $103 million over 3 years. Those funds support quality improvement via local implementation, regional support, and state level projects, as well as a shared services pilot that was identified in the master plan. Impact intentionally targets early learning sites needing more resources, including family childcare, family friend and neighbor providers, centers without state and federal funding, and other settings such as home visiting programs and family resource centers. Again, we're trying to fill those gaps to ensure that there is a cohesive system of support. We are also funding a shared services pilot in actually 7 counties. So Impact Legacy will continue, our intention is to continue to strengthen the quality improvement system in California by increasing equitable access to resources that build on providers' strengths and leverage the important relationships they have with children and families. We propose streamlining the infrastructure supports and moving away from ratings. Yes, you heard me. We're moving away from ratings to focus on proven strategies like coaching and strategies that connect providers and build on their strengths like communities of practice and peer mentoring, because based on our research and evaluation, that has been what has been most effective. We envision creating a targeted approach to deliver coaching as a primary strategy to supporting the sites new to Impact and without access to other resources. Coaching will be job embedded, and teachers and providers will have opportunities for professional development. The professional development that they are also compensated for, and that is provided during the times that work for them. This shift away from rating will allow us to more deeply target critical areas like anti-bias and anti-racism, early childhood behavioral health, family engagement, trauma-informed care, and ACEs, and supporting children who are multilingual learners. Specifically, we are intentionally taking the steps to create a more culturally responsive system. We also see this as an opportunity to expand some of the very exciting current work of First 5 California, such as findings from the dual language learner pilot and the policy recommendation from a current collaboration with the UC Berkeley Goldman School of Public Policy around suspension and expulsion of young children and early learning programs. Excuse me. This new investment will include an evaluation plan that is developed as the program is developed in order to collect baseline data. Despite our proposal to move away from formal rating, we still plan to collect robust data to identify effective strategy. So again, part of that is still part of a continuous improvement cycle for quality improvement. We want to evaluate the efficacy of coaching to identify professional development needs and gaps and assess progress towards an equitable system. We will continue to support the workforce registry through at least 2025, but the registry has seen a huge growth over the last year, and we want to continue to support its transformation into a system that works for all and can be utilized as a single source of verified data. We also plan to pilot badges as part of workforce development as an alternative to rating. This is a strategy that has shown promise in other states and one that embraces workforce strengths, provides valuable information to families, and is very much provider driven. So that's a very high level approach of what we plan to do on some of the concepts. We plan to present some of these concepts to our commission at our July 28th meeting and make a potential funding request in October or later. So I am happy to open it up to any questions that folks may have. Questions?
Jackie, thanks. Oh, I see Deborah has a hand up. Deborah.
Hi, Deborah.
Good morning, Jackie. Thank you so much. I'm glad to see you here, and I'm listening to you, and I'm motivated. And then at the same time, I sit back and think, in Kern County, First 5 really has done minimum directly for family daycare providers. And that's disappointing, but I'm encouraged to hear what you're saying. But at the same time, I'm sitting in a reality of knowing personally lack of support that First 5 has given Kern County providers. We do appreciate and did appreciate the PPE that they provided for us. But at the same time, the former administration, no support directly for providers. So I'm hoping that this will be a change, and I'm putting it out there, and I'm glad to see that someone will knock on that door and say, we need to see a change. We need to see a come up. We need to see you support the providers better. And again, it's great to hear everything that you're in the process of doing. Also, when you talked about QCC and inequities and the audit and things that's going to be going on, I'm sitting here and I'm also thinking, you know, when we identify that there's a problem here, what's taking so long for First Five to address it? You know, why are we just addressing it now? And then at the same time, you know, and as Jane mentioned here earlier, as Janelle mentioned earlier, that we were meeting a month, but of course we've always said we needed to meet more. So when you gave that timeline, I'm thinking, oh, no, you need to meet more. It's going to take a lot longer because by winter, and when you're dealing with something head to head like this, it really takes a lot of time. So again, I'm glad to see you here. I hope everything works out the way you say, but I'm going to say that somebody's got to be more accountable in all these counties to make sure that providers are really being supported in the way they should be, because it has been failure. In all honesty, thank you.
No, I received that, Deborah. I've worked with, you know, my good friend Dolores in Kern, understand kind of the challenges in Kern. I'm not sure if folks understand kind of the governance structure of First Five California with local commissions. We don't actually have direct authority over local commissions. So we are, my authority here and my vision here is to work deeply with associations who have a stronger influence on local. So, but embedded in our plans, my idea is that you don't get our money if you don't do the things that we believe are equitable and just and right. Right? Transformation. And so that's okay if Kern doesn't get my money. I'm okay with that. Right? So and again, many of our counties would say that they have benefited from our investment in impact. But again, I want to be a leader that speaks my values. Right? Ooh, I'm feeling some sort of way now, y'all. I want to lead with my values. I'm a refugee kid, multilingual learner. My family came here for democracy, for the opportunity to thrive. My mama took care of me when I was younger. My grandma took care of me when I was younger. Right? That in addition to home visiting, a number of other things wrapped around in a system that worked together in that moment. And I always tell people that was under a Republican administration. Y'all, it was under a Republican administration, and they provided me and my family the supports to thrive. So I'm living my values as this new ED, Deborah. It is going to take time, and it's going to take organizing, right? And I can't do without the locals, and I cannot do without the providers, and I need those voices to be lifted up. But with that said, my intention is to work closely with the association, First Five Association of California, who has their, a governance structure to implement locally. I don't know if that makes sense, but again, I feel you, I see you, and this is where we want to head because our dollars need to follow our values.
So Jackie, I think what you're just saying is, I think you've hit us all in our hearts to hear you say something so heartfelt. And also, I have known you for years, and I just so appreciate your mind that you connect to that heart, and you're putting, and I think what I'm hearing you say too is you have hands, but you also need to hold those with others. And I think that's one of the collective powers of this group that's come across is the ability to exchange these ideas, but also the compassion and passion that is coming through in your ideas is just so powerful. So Horace, then Carla, then Donna. And then what I'd like to do is bring us back to the graphics so we can get ready and preserve as much time for P5 to help us with some of the details left to go. So Horace, then Carla, then Donna.
And real quick, Jackie, you're beautiful. Thank you for that. Thank you so much for that. I felt your words and I know how it feels. Thank you.
Yes, to shadow Matt. Thank you, Jackie. Congratulations on your promotion. virtual hug. We feel it. We appreciate you. You're here for a reason. I love the passion. I love the quality that's coming from you in your voice. And I believe what you say. We know there's a structure that we have to improve on, and that's something that you laid out in your slides. So some of my questions come out to you is like, okay, we have QCC has 8,502 participant sites. How do we quantify those sites are being used? And this is something what Jackie was talking about. Deborah was bringing on. And we understand that the current situation and where the version where we want to go, the version that we want to participate, but it takes the masses of the local people to accept. And like you said, if they don't provide the quality, they can't receive the money. So you answer some of my questions. The work group, the 42 focus work groups that you have set up, are those across California? Are they in certain areas? I'm out of Central Valley, Patterson, California. I've seen First Five. I've dealt with First Five in the area of Modesto, but they're very pocket oriented. At least they have been. So yeah, how do we address all of California, especially the desert, where there is no control, there's no support? And lastly, I just want to say thank you for bringing up the idea of removing the ratings. For a lot of people, they're frantic and scared. Let's teach them how to improve and how to give them that quality. Yet alone, they may already be doing it, but they just don't have the tools. And this is why we're here as a work group. So thank you very much.
Yeah, no, thank you, Horace. I grew up in the Central Valley. I grew up in Stockton. So I feel you. I understand you. I understand the resources and the dynamics of Central Valley. So our intention is to meet in all regions and focus groups and 8 people. It's, one of the things when I got actually this promoted and identified as executive director here at First Five California. And those who've known me a long time, I've had a journey. But what moved me some in the deepest moments with all my Central Valley folks, the 209 folks, right? They're like, Jackie, hashtag 209. And like, you don't understand that unless you're from the Valley, right? Like, and it was like, that is me, right? Like, I feel that. So yeah, Central Valley will not be forgotten, trust. So, next question. I don't know if it's all your questions for us. Yes, Central Valley. Okay, cool.
So Horace shared a lot of some of the comments, Jackie. So first and foremost, the idea of transforming QCC is a message that heard really loud and clear, and that is very, very significant. Secondly, leadership matters, and you're naming systemic racism very clearly in our rating systems, and carrying leadership in your role, name that, has been really, really critical. The question, I wonder if you could help with this work group. We've discussed quality and quality in the base. Back in February, the work group was really clear. All the work that early care providers throughout the state do is quality, and that should be part of the base. I wonder if you have any thoughts about sort of, yes, naming quality at the base for the field, and then how do you think about enhancement, especially as you're doing this equity work?
Yeah, I mean, there are competency frameworks that we work with in the organization, and Erin Dubia is our point person, right? So there are kind of base standards that should be part of the base, and the cost of care is important, but that's why I think I've kind of brought up like quality is happening. So when you're doing cost of care, people don't think it's just not paying for just the time. It actually comes with quality. And how do we look at that? One of the biggest things for me when we think about even the base is what I said earlier is like cultural responsiveness needs to be in that base, and we need to fund it, right? Like, I don't want it to be a later thing, and I don't want to be an enhancement. It needs to be a base requirement for me, right? And that is either PD, that is training, there are competencies, there's ways to do that, but we need to be intentional with that and demand it.
It is fantastic. Thank you, Jackie. And also virtual hug. Really, really appreciate you taking the time given what this morning looks like.
Yeah, I'm I'm back in that child advocate thing, Carla. Like I'm back there. Like I know.
Okay, Donna, you're
kind of in the same place Jackie is, so forgive me if I get a little emotional. I am a local commissioner in Sacramento County, and I'm very excited to see the direction that First Five California is heading. And I just want to reiterate what Jackie said, that all commissions are independent to their county, and there are commissions who are doing a lot of really good work. First Five Sacramento has been undertaking a lot of racial equity diversity work, including an assessment of how our funding goes out, what programs we're operating, how they may impact communities across Sacramento County. And it's a really great model. And I think other commissions might want to take a look at the good work happening in Sacramento. The second thing I wanted to lift up, just as something that could be an accompaniment to the work you're doing, Jackie, is CCRC did some work in partnership with California State University Northridge on a report called Are You In?, which looked at the QRIS system and its implementation with family child care specifically. The findings came out in 2018, so not too long ago. And largely what we found is family child care providers weren't in, and that the system that had been designed in QRIS was not in alignment with the values and priorities of family child care. And I think having that as a baseline as you look at equity might be helpful. So I'll make sure to pass that along and share that with you. But I just reiterate, as we look at all of these things, if we're going to pay people based on the goals that we are setting here, it has to be accessible to all, equitable, and everyone needs to be able to participate at an even level. So whatever we set up, I can't say that enough, and I'll say it again and again until you're all sick of me. So thanks.
No, I agree, Donna, and thank you for your service at the local commission, because we can't do this. So you're our network, right? Like, so we need to kind of think strategically about that. Our numbers seem small, and we are, $100 million actually isn't a whole lot of money, and we don't, that's not the entire California. We're here to be catalysts to actually in support of our state agency, our sister agencies with, CDSS and CDE, right? How do we do this together? And I get that some programs have to be rated, but that's not where we're at. And so we understand that that's still what people need to do. But in terms of our investment about quality, we know the R doesn't really work for our folks on the ground. So thank you.
Well, Jackie, thanks for giving us your updates and giving us a moment to, I think, pause and reflect and think about all that is underway that has a connection to what we're doing as a work group and then goes beyond that. And I think it just also shows the way that people here are wearing multiple hats, and the way this work is both about what we do in this role, but also then what we take into our other spaces. So thank you for taking that time. I'm going to, bring us back to this, and we'll have some more time as a work group to have further discussion. But I do realize this is something we've shared, we've said we're updating, and we've made some tweaks, but there still might be more to make. So we'd like to just ask just quickly any, we certainly have some things that the things listed under number 2 change because we've brought those into the discussion. But are there things that people would call out as like wanting to see change or addressed in fusions of the framework? Robin.
Yeah, good morning. I feel like maybe this got discussed during the one meeting I missed. And I did have an interview about this, but I'm just wondering if the workforce well-being section got discussed. I'll share I'd like to know what was discussed, but I'll also share my suggested changes. I want it to be stronger. So workforce well-being doesn't work for me. I want it to say something along the lines of workforce compensation, because that's what this is. This is all about the compensation. I need to put my glasses on because I wrote notes on a printout. The other is the first bullet, again, seems to be combined. I know I've brought this up probably at every meeting. I want educator outcomes to be completely separate from compensation. So I think it should be 3 bullets. Well, actually, I guess it would be 4. And then the word fair compensation also, I believe, needs to be changed. Fair is, like, what does that even mean? I believe the words that we've been using are professional compensation or a professional wage. So that's my 3 cents. And so I guess the main thing was, did any of that get discussed at the meeting that I missed? Because I feel like I've said this, but maybe I missed it.
No, thanks for restating that, Robin. And we, just to be clear, I haven't updated this since I think it was introduced about 2 meetings ago. So there's some things that are in the queue to do. And I think we did talk about provider needs, at the meeting, and we'd be happy to make sure you see those notes. But there are things that, and I'll go to where our next slides maybe capture some of those things. But thank you for the comments. Anyone else? I also see a comment from Mari that was in response to Jackie, and I don't know if CD, you have any response to the quality piece and wanted to make any comments about that.
Can I make a comment? This is
please.
CSS. Sorry. For folks in the public, there's a question about moving away from ratings from one of our work group members. Please know that the presentations from First 5 California in regards to some of their considerations. So this is not a state consideration, but rather a really significant update from First 5 California. So just wanted to clarify that. And Mari, if there's additional questions on that, please let us know. And I'll turn it over to Virginia if there's any comments there.
Hi, thanks everyone for this robust conversation. And want to echo what Carla said, that as it stands now, Quality Counts California is administered by 3 separate agencies. So you have the California Department of Social Services, you have First 5 California's Impact, and then you have a $50 million investment from CDE for California state preschool programs, which includes centers and our family child care home education networks that participate in state preschool. Right now, Education Code Section 8203.1 requires CDE with its investment in QCC to do ratings. So we are statutorily required to do ratings. Additionally, given the fact that this is our statute, we're really looking at how do we use ratings to identify and direct our quality improvement support to those most in need of further support. And we have ongoing work to further look at this and dive in and connecting with the research and the feedback that we're hearing. But I do want to flag that there are those 3 separate pieces of QCC, and we also know that higher tiers of rating from some research that LPI has been doing is associated with higher DRDP scores, and especially for the most vulnerable children, for minorities, and so forth. And so on the one hand, we are required to do these ratings. The biggest reason, right, is of course as in statute, but also this research has shown that when that these ratings can be a tool for us to determine how we are best supporting those Black and Brown children, those children that are at promise, or we're trying to use that word instead of at risk, right, to help really increase equity and make sure that our quality improvement supports are really helping folks and supporting folks to help leverage those big outcome changes for our most vulnerable children.
Okay. Well, thanks, Virginia, for that, the further comment there. Carla, you have your hand. And then what I'd like to do is move us back into kind of recapping where we've been and get us ready for P5 to share a bit. So Carla, go ahead.
Thanks, Janelle. Just two really quick things. One, this work group has been really clear that the quality conversations will have two different phases. One phase is around the base and that discussion, and then all the questions, issues that are being lifted up in regards to the long-term discussions on quality and ratings would be phase 2 beyond the work group. So just pointing that out. And then Robin did want to address, there's been a lot of one-on-one conversations with the work group members on how to update the framework that Janelle is sharing. So those notes are in there. It's just in the queue. I want to be really clear for anyone that doesn't see those comments just yet, that it's in the queue as we're pulling together as the work group and WestEd are working on pulling together that final draft report.
Okay, so speaking of draft report, I do want to take a second here and go from framework to what occurred in our last 2 meetings, which is we've talked about the base rate. We've talked about cost model. So this is just a quick capture of the areas that we talked about with regard to the base rate. What were the questions that were posed to for work group discussion, and what are some of the points of discussion agreement that were made by the work group. And so just quickly, I think with regard to compensation, it was very clear, let's not, peg this to a minimum wage. It really is a reference to some type of living wage with a wage scale. There's, in terms of benefits, wanting to see incorporation of benefits in the rate scale structure. Ratios and group size, we had talked about our current program standards as a reference. In the cost model, you'll hear a bit more detail, but importantly, shifting from attendance to enrollment basis for funding. And then we spent a considerable amount of time talking about professional development supports and came to wanting to see time included for the things that are necessary to meet program standards, and a reflection of planning time included in what we would say is part of the base rate, and additional options that would complement the rate with regard to the way professional learning needs are attended to. We touched on, but I don't know that we fully got through, talking about non-teaching personnel, but there was general agreement that should be something that's included. It may vary based on program size. And then further input needed on the non-personnel expenses, inclusion of and special needs, dual language learners, and operating reserves. And so that's where we get to today. Before we turn this over to P5, I'm going to turn it over to Carla, because this is the things 2 weeks ago that we talked about with regard to base rate. We came back and really dived deep last week into the cost model variables, of which the cost model is inclusive of the base rate plus other costs that would be related to funding the system. And so here is the list of 10 cost variables. So Carla, do you want to talk through this real quick? And then I have the second slide, which is the second part of your handout with the other variables.
Thank you so much, Janelle. So as many of you know, and this is to set up our conversation with the P5 researchers that have been helping us pull together a cost model for the work group. So until recently, the federal government often gave states the opportunity to set rates based on the market prices. And California has been doing this for some time. Now there is an opportunity for alternative methodologies to market prices, and part of that includes cost model estimation calculator, and that's what we've been discussing with P5. The work group has been really clear that we want to move to a cost model estimation, and part of that is looking at this alternative methodology. And we've been focused on three things. The building of the cost model, which we'll continue to discuss later today. And then that cost model has the variables you see here. These are some of the components that we're considering in the cost model. The discussions we have had are about the values that will be in those variables. So how many hours, how many children served, that sort of quantity. On July 6th, we will look at the dollar amount. How much does it cost for each of these variables for a early care provider throughout the state? And the cost survey is giving us that dollar amount. The work group has had a lot of discussions about the variables that you see on the screen right now. And the discussions have focused on whether or not to include them, whether or not there's a certain value that makes the most sense. In addition, we want to be clear that these conversations happen throughout several times during our work group meetings. So if you look at number 2, 3, 7, 8, and 10, those have been discussions since the beginning of work group meetings. And then for number 1, ratios and group size, we really focused on it in June. Number 4, training, we really focused on it in June as well. Teaching staff and planning was during our May and June discussions. The family engagement was just recent last week. And then targeted child populations have also been May and June. So if we could get the next slide, please. Now, this has been our other components of the variable. These are the fixed cost components of the variables. We are making the assumption that these will be included as variables because of discussions that this work group also had. These are components that the work group has said in order for programs to work, we have to have a basic understanding of what will be included. So giving you all this as a cheat sheet, because we know that some of you were able to make the last meeting and others may have missed it. So these 2 slides provide you with a cheat sheet as P5 goes through the cost model and you're thinking, well, is that included or not included? This gives you an overview of the assumptions of what will be included. So wanted to give you that. And you all should have a 1-pager also that Krista emailed to you that gives you all of this on one sheet so that you could reference as we go through the discussion in the next hour and a half. And then Janelle, can we go over timeline really quick or anything else that you wanted to cover?
Do you mind if we do the timeline after P5, Carla,
Yes.
to wrap up and say, here's what's next? And okay, so what we want to do is we do want to close out this segment and ask if you have any comments about this. Is, you know, we have had a number of folks that were not at one or both of the last 2 meetings, so we wanted to catch up, and that's why we're spending time revisiting the framework and revisiting what was discussed with regard to base as well as cost modeling. And then we're going to shift in a moment here to Gina bringing us back to the cost model. So any comments from the work group before we remind the public of the chat option and then move it over to P5. So Robin, please.
Me again. 2 things. One is earlier, I'm not sure which slide it was. It talked about that this group is not going to be addressing benefits, and I just thought that was odd. I can hear the translation.
Hold on a second. We're hearing the Spanish translation through the English channel right now. Just to, I don't know how that's happening. But Robin, I think the issue was there's a JLMC for benefits. So I had said this last week or last time this came up, which is that this group is not going to come up with the contours of benefits, but this group has said benefits need to be included in the base rate.
Yes. Okay.
So that is what
talking about it. Yes. And then the other was in this last chart where it said something about license. And we can go back to that chart, but I just want to, and it probably the answer is going to be yes, but where it says, not this one, maybe the next one. This one. No, I think it might be the next one. Was there another one? That one, cost of operating a licensed center. Are we going to have a separate bullet of cost of operating a Title V center? Did we discuss that? Those are my comments.
And we did discuss that. So that's something we'll take as we evolve this, and maybe something we can, I see Gina nodding. So maybe you can help us figure out how that gets addressed. Thank you. Any other comments before we move forward here and moving? Okay, so while if there's any last comments here, but Krista, do you mind giving us the reminder on how we're dealing with public comment and our chat function?
Yes, we will now enable chat for public comment. Please feel free to type your comments into chat for public record. Thank you.
And so we're gonna move, so we'll leave the chat function open for a few minutes here, but wanting to move to turn this over to Gina and P5 to continue us through a discussion of the cost model. So Gina, all yours.
Sure, thanks. I was actually going to type in the chat an answer to that question that Robin had, but I'll just say it before we jump into looking at the model together, the model variables together. The reference to licensing in that list as part of that whole list is a foundation. The model has those elements as a foundation of how it functions. So except for in instances where a program can operate without meeting licensing, which would be the case of a family, friend, and neighbor care setting, but they have other regulations that they meet, the model will not run a center or a licensed family child care that does not meet licensing. It can run programs that meet regulations in addition to licensing. So meeting licensing and Title V. And you'll see that actually in the chart I'm about to share that related to ratio and group size for Title V programs, it is meeting community care licensing and meeting Title V regulations. So just to be clear that is a foundation that the model functions at. That is not saying that is the end of the model. That is the base of the model. Okay, so what we're going to look at today is, as Carla went through, we've covered pretty much every of the base elements. And what we're going to do is look at them together in one place. There are a couple items that we need to spend a little bit more time on today. And the approach to assigning compensation is going to be one of those big things. So we're not going to go back and revisit decisions that were made last week around ratio and group size and things like that, but you see them all in one place with this particular resource that I'm going to walk us through here on the screen. And this is leading us all, while I know we're not doing timeline until a little bit later in the meeting, this is leading us all to having those cost per child answers. So all of these discrete pieces build up via the formulas in the cost model to answering those cost per child information that we're going to be looking at together in the July 6th meeting. So just a reminder that this is just a stepping stone of the model development. This is not the model in its final form. So as part of referencing these base variables, we again want to think about those same concepts that were on the last slide, that as a foundation, the way the cost model functions is it includes anything that relates to the cost of operating a legally operated program, which for many of the programs that you would be modeling in your cost model, includes meeting licensing standards. It includes the concept of serving children from birth to school age or 13 years of age. So it includes the whole spectrum of children that can be paid for by subsidy funding. It includes full day, full year, as well as non-traditional or overnight hours of care. So anything that happens before, say, 5 a.m. when a center may or a family childcare may typically open, and after 7 or 8 p.m. when programs sort of typically close. So that non-traditional or overnight, however you want to refer to those hours. It allows for understanding costs for that type of a program as well. It includes all mandatory employer taxes, coverage for breaks. That's an important piece. There's not sort of anything in how the model functions that's going to suddenly give you an answer to a question about the cost per child that doesn't include things like paying into FICA for the staff in the program. Those are functional elements of the model in order to always be giving you the full picture. We're not answering a question on just how much more does it cost to serve a child when you have an art curriculum. The model is answering the whole cost of doing business to deliver childcare to children and families. So every single piece of it is in there. Same thing with non-personnel expenses. When we talk about the variables that are in this blue chart that we're about to look at together, we're not really unpacking non-personnel when we look at those, because those things are already baked into the idea that you can't operate a family childcare home without, so you have to pay occupancy. There's some form of rent or occupancy or a mortgage. There's utilities associated with running a business. Same for centers. Those things have to be part of the expense side of the equation in a cost model. Otherwise, we are not putting forward the accurate picture of the total cost. So what I need for everyone with me today as we really sort of continue to go deep is to hang on to all those things as the foundation of how the cost model functions, while we then look at things in more detail like compensation, because it doesn't, when we talk about compensation in more detail, say that we're not then also including non-personnel expenses. All of that comes with it. We're just unpacking some of the variables that have more of a choice point with them. Like, how much are we going to pay people? There's a choice point on that, right? We know there's current wages, which are fairly low. And then there's also the idea of ensuring that people are fairly compensated, but with a living wage, the things that they can actually pay to live in their community. And so there's some decision points that have to be made there. With non-personnel expenses, there's not as much of a continuum of decision points. And what we want is, with a fully operating program, meeting all these different criteria, that you have the full continuum of non-personnel expenses included in that. That does include things like the cost of the food program, serving food to children, all of the sort of expenses of delivery of food. So you see a sort of an abbreviated list here. We roll those things up around the idea of like program administration. Occupancy is a big bucket, that there's a lot of things that can go into that annual occupancy number. But, and you may remember from previous meetings, we've shared a slide where there's about probably 36 non-personnel items on it. That's the sort of data that is gathered in behind the scenes in the model. And then we organize it into these sort of more rolled up categories for how we then think about cost per child or cost per program in order for those non-personnel items to go up when you serve more children or go up when your program is larger. So there is a relationship to growth for non-personnel, but there's not as much sort of continuum of change with non-personnel when we think about these other variables that we're about to look at. So some of the decision points that we had to make, and we're going to go through them fairly quickly so we can get to the ones that we need to discuss in more detail today. You see the information that we've already discussed captured here. It's very similar to what we just looked at on the slide with a little bit more detail, because as the model builders, we need a little more meat on the bone in order to be able to build the formulas behind the scenes. But you see, just to my point earlier, that there is Title 22 programs will meet community care licensing for ratio and group size. Title V programs will meet community care licensing as well as Title V regulations, because we understand that there is a negotiation across those two sets of regs. That is built into how the model functions. So if you pick a program type, it will then follow either Title 22 or Title V for these things. That applies to centers, small and large family childcare homes. Anywhere that we're referencing Title V, that's the same approach, that we would be pulling in the Caption or Family Childcare Home Education Network regs, as well as thinking about the CCTR and CSPP regulations, or preschool and the childcare regulations. So sort of goes without saying that that flows throughout everything. Then you see we had some discussion about non-classroom staffing pattern, and these are beyond, that includes meeting licensing, of course, but then sort of beyond the teachers that are in the classroom, what are the other staffing to run an organization? We spent a lot of time last week talking about family childcare, and we heard some suggestions on the number of hours of support that family childcare settings need outside of the required full-time owner or the required owner and assistant based on the size of the home. And so you see a support staffing number in here. That is in addition to what the family childcare home brings to the table to meet licensing in order to support them. One of the big questions that we're always trying to grapple with, and same thing for centers, is how do we make it so that the staff in these programs, and I'm going to refer to everybody as staff in this instance, both homes and centers, are not working 70 and 80 hours a week in order to do their job, because there's no way they can get it done in a 40-hour week. That really comes down to staffing, and it comes down to having more staffing to meet regulations, paperwork, things related to funding streams, and the services delivered to the children. So that's in large part where these scenarios for non-classroom staffing have come from. The bottom, we're going to look at sort of a summary of how many hours in total are added to the population for family childcare. So that you only see 25 hours a week here, we're going to see a total of it summed up for both centers and family childcare. So you can see in total how much additional support in order to run the programs based on what we've heard from individuals. So then you next see planning time. This relates to that idea of additional support per week. So following that same pattern, Title 22, 1 hour a day for the lead teacher. Title V has a little more staffing or a little more planning time based on the fact that they have more regulations and things that they're required to do. So 1.5 as well as 0.5 for other teaching staff. For family childcare settings, and again, this is just in the base. There can be other selection points in the model, but we're focusing on the values in the base. And then in family childcare, it's the same sort of approach. 1 hour a day for the provider or owner, yet in Title V funded programs, 1.5 hours for the provider owner, and then a 0.5 hour a day for the assistant. So these roll up to a number of hours per week of additional support staffing. And the way the model functions, that translates into like a line item of either a floater or a substitute that is equivalent to an assistant teacher qualification in the program. So that's how that concept gets translated into a dollar amount in the model. It is not telling programs they have to hire that person. It is giving them the resources to do it. That's the way the model functions. And that's another big piece of everything we're looking at here. While we do use regulations in order to ensure that our base meets regulations, anything you see here, if it looks different than what, say, a program is held to under licensing, it is not changing the regulation. It is instead trying to encompass what it actually looks like to run programs and what we've heard from programs around what their reality is or what they may be currently doing in practice in order to deliver the services to children and families. Janelle, I'm just going to pause. It looked like you might have been about to jump in. Did I miss anything?
No, you're good. Sorry.
No? Okay. No, it's okay. I just saw it looked like you lifted up a little, like maybe you were trying to jump in. Okay. So then moving on to training hours, we talked about these last week, and what we've captured here is that for both Title 22 and Title 5, that the minimum annual training hours for directors and teachers would be 21 hours annually. And then same thing for family childcare homes. For FFNs, there are training hours required of family friend and neighbor care settings under the federal child care funding. And so what we were looking at to put into the base for family friend and neighbor care at this point aligns with the 16 hours that are required in licensing in order to be on the more conservative side, to have enough hours to meet that federal legislation around the fact that there are basic health and safety trainings that are required of FFNs. It's part of the system of sort of ensuring that that is in place within California, but we know that the federal funding stream has that requirement, and that's something that did change with reauthorization. So we want to make sure the model accounts for the cost of that for family, friend, and neighbor care settings. This 21 is different than licensing, as we discussed last week, that many programs that are operating at as a licensed program actually have staff that have their child development permit, and they are required to achieve 21 hours a year. So that is the basis for moving from the 16 to the 21 for Title 22. So then moving on to a few more of the variables that we have talked about in different ways across many of the work group meetings, but we did not look at in this more targeted way within the model. But what we've been listening to is some of those sort of foundational values around the idea that family engagement is a critical part of quality childcare programs. At the base level, the tension becomes sort of what is it that you're including in the cost of running the program as part of that concept of family engagement. What we hear from a lot of programs, and when we sort of read regulations about communicating with families, family conferences, or sort of the traditional old school parent-teacher conference is basically what this is, are something that a lot of programs will relate, that they like to have points in time that they connect with the family routinely to talk about their child's development, sort of think about what the parent is seeing in their child's development and what does that mean for the education that's occurring at the family childcare home or the childcare center. And so what we are suggesting in the base is 2 family conferences per year per child enrolled. So obviously the total number of conferences and the total number of hours would be dictated by the number of children served in the scenario that the model was running. And linked to each conference is 2 hours of floater or substitute coverage in the form of assistant hours in the cost in order for the teacher or the owner to be able to do those conferences with families. And that's the same across family child cares and centers in this instance. Moving down to educational supports. We have child assessment tools, so dollars for, and they don't have to only be for child assessment tools, but it sort of helps folks to understand, like, how did we come up with $150 per child to support the program to purchase the types of materials or be implementing those materials, making copies of ASQ as needed, things like that programs may be doing. It's not telling programs exactly what to do with the dollars, but instead assigning a dollar amount per child so the resources are there at the base to support the work that we hear is going on. And then for overall sort of curriculum support, and again, it's a bucket of dollars that can be implemented based on what a program needs. It may be more about pulling in training or coaching around curriculum, or it may be actually purchasing the curriculum. It really depends on an individual program. The purpose of it in a cost model is to put a dollar amount to it so it's in the base rate, so programs are supported to go out and be doing the work that meets where they are. And again, in both instances for centers and family child cares. So similar fashion with child health and development, it's something that is sort of alluded to within licensing standards, but there are not clear cost drivers in licensing standards. So what we had suggested was allowing for $50 per child annually for programs for activities related to supporting and any sort of monitoring or tracking of child health and development. The text that you see there, health and behavioral health, screening, tracking, that's just an example of what sometimes programs will relate that they use the dollars for. That is not telling programs that that's what they have to use the dollars for. It is just sort of for your reference. We would focus on in the model the $50 per child. And again, the total amount in the budget would depend on how many children the scenario that we were modeling served. We do have a question here, and we're seeking input from family, friend, and neighbor care settings, as well as folks that work closely with family, friend, and neighbor care around whether or not there should be a cost in the base for family, friend, and neighbor care around child and health and development. And then, as Carla said, we've talked about operating reserve. Right now, the amount that we're, this is one of the things that can go up and down in the model, but we kind of pin it at a point. And generally, folks recommend a 5% of net revenue for a program in order to have an operating reserve available in case of closures and other sort of blips on the radar that we've all been experiencing fairly acutely for the last 2 years. So we know why we need an operating reserve better now than we probably ever did before, and how many childcare programs don't have any operating reserve. And so that is something that can be built into the base. Again, you can lower the amount to 3%. You can increase the amount. You have some flexibility when you're actually running the model to make that choice. And then we talked about a couple areas around targeted populations. And so we've broken these out and assigned some values to them that then could be integrated into the base. Inclusion supports is the first, and then further down, you just start to see the top of the next table is dual language learners. Those are the two areas that we're gonna talk about quickly. And in the case of inclusion supports, it includes both equipment and specialized materials, anything sort of extra that a program may need to purchase in order to be working directly with a child that has special needs or developmental delay or any sort of modifications to the environment. And then the other piece of that is actually in staffing with inclusion aids. So adding more staffing to the dynamic to support the program to meet the needs of all the children, because you add a little more staffing to support when there is a child that has special needs or has developmental delays or challenging behaviors that are being managed by the program. In this particular area, both inclusion supports and dual language, it really also comes down to sort of that mechanism. As Janelle mentioned, one of the things that we heard around ratio and group size, but sort of program services is the idea of paying on enrollment versus attendance. The model functions in a way that it is about enrollment. The model doesn't take attendance. So the model sort of gives you a number that you would be paying someone based on children enrolled in the program, whether or not they show up at that on a given day. inclusion supports in dual language, you have to think about whether you pay a program for these things to build their capacity and you build it into the base rate because it's a capacity element, or do you link it only to enrolled children that fit the profile? So there's definitely a significant decision to be made around how you apply this. And that is part of the model, but also really depends on your system and how you're thinking about applying these types of resources for programs. And you certainly have ways that you currently do it. That part of the discussion is, do you continue doing it the way you do it, or do you want to look at folding it into the base in a more program capacity support way versus only when a child is enrolled sort of way? Same thing with dual language learners. So again, split between dollars for materials and per child amount annually for those materials, and then increasing wages for bilingual staff who are engaging in the curriculum with the children and families. So there's a lot of opportunity to think about exactly how you do that and how you go about sort of thinking about what that increase of the compensation would be. All right, so that brings us through all of the different variables. I want to quickly talk about the sort of in summary that I promised. So staffing totals for a Title 22 program. So just Title 22 is summarized here, not Title 5. And these are totals that are beyond the staffing that is required of the program in licensing. So you see, if you look at the blue shaded column, that's for family childcare, putting it all together so that in addition to the owner for a small family childcare, or the owner plus assistant for a large family childcare, the model has an additional 30 hours of staffing time each week that are supporting the implementation of that family childcare setting. So it really is one full-time person for a small home or the owner themselves, plus another person at 75% full-time, 30 hours a week, if you consider full-time to be a 40-hour work week. Which I smile a little because we could all debate that, what our full-time work weeks actually look like for all of us. But I wanted to show in summary, because when we break it out by variable, sometimes it's hard to see in the total how many hours of additional staffing is being recommended in the base in the cost model, because you're looking at them as individual rows. So we wanted to put it together. And then in similar fashion, the first column for centers, we had to sort of run the scenario with a certain number of children in mind in order to relate to that idea of positions, because there's formulas that X number of children trigger more staffing or more of a given position. And you see the multiple administrative non-classroom type positions, and then the 5 hours of teacher staff time per lead teacher per week for the planning time, which is actually the same amount as the family childcare. So those last two bullets are the same amount across the two programs. All right, so we talked about discretionary benefits. Let's just quickly look at how we've summarized that up. We know from lots of discussion that discretionary benefits are included in the cost model. There's three different sort of buckets or categories of them, really two if you consider the paid leave kind of as one. But the first is the first bullet there that you see in the little green table is a discretionary amount per employee. We include the concept of the family childcare owner as an employee. It's really the only way to ensure that we assign cost related to that position in a family childcare setting. I understand that as business owners, we don't consider ourselves employees of our own businesses, but for this instance, sort of bear with me in that this is a way that we can assign the same elements of benefits to everyone that's working in the childcare program, whether it's a family childcare or a center. So there's an amount per employee that is a lump dollar amount. It is again trying to put a cost next to the concept of discretionary. It is not telling someone that it has to go toward just their health insurance or just their retirement. It is instead ensuring that the cost of those discretionary benefits is made available as part of understanding the cost of delivering childcare. And then the other pot are the paid leave, paid sick leave, paid vacation time with a number of days next to those. And those translate into an hourly payment to the substitute or someone to actually cover the program. Because the idea is if you took a sick day, your business would still be open, someone else would be running it. So that's how we translate that into a cost in the cost model. The way the cost model functions is it allows you to make changes to the level of so you can change the number of days of paid sick leave or the number of days of paid vacation. You can change the numeric value of that discretionary pot of dollars. You can go up or down with it. We start with 10 sick and 10 vacation days. We always check all employment law. In one of the states we were just working in, we had 10 in the model, and then the state passed a law that employers had to give people 10 days. So luckily the model was in step with the law, but we always check that to make sure. And then as far as the discretionary benefits amount, we look toward the Kaiser Family Foundation, who does national maintenance of sort of what is the per employee amount that organizations are paying within states. And then we adjust that as we hear from in data collection, if we hear something drastically different, or if folks really feel that it is underrepresented. So that's, again, why the model functions in a way that you can change it as far as what the actual point of payment is going to be for that discretionary amount. All right, so I'm going to pause. We're going to talk about compensation next, which I know you can see that there was like a little teaser there at the bottom of my screen that there was a compensation table there. But before we go to discussing compensation, which is going to be a fairly more substantive conversation, I wanted to check in on folks. Any reactions to that synthesis of what we've been discussing for the last few months?
Eric, I see your hand raised. Please go ahead.
Thank you, Gina, for the succinct description. The only thing I had a question on, you can scroll up where it talked about educational assessments between family care and center. Just want to make sure that for Title V centers, there's additional assessments that are required, Drdp, that sort of thing that may or may not be required in family child care or under Title 22. Or in a Head Start setting, there are some sort of additional child assessments that are required. So I'm assuming the cost model builds that in by that modality, or or does it not differentiate?
It would. Yeah, it would, exactly. Yeah. Thanks for the question, because right now it's not split out. We're really looking at a Title 22 number there. We did not up it yet for Title V. And right now the model is not as focused on costing out early Head Start and Head Start, but that's something that we will have the ability to do sort of in post-August 15th with the model. We can build out those additional functionalities once you have your base functioning model. Eric Peterson.
The other thing I would just throw in there, and I'm not sure it's the work of this group, but for the assessments, we need support for the assessors and training for the assessors, because we struggle to get quality people that come in and assess our classrooms on all of the different tools. So I just want to throw that in there.
Yeah, I think that's a really important system catch. Probably not something, unless in some states have this where it's on the organization to pay for the assessor, the child care entity to pay for the assessor. So then we would build it into how the direct service cost model functions. That sort of speaks for most states. It's more of a system model to understand how we ensure that we have enough resourcing and training for the assessors to have a good workforce of them available. Deborah.
Thank you. Yeah, again, the educational supports under that assessment. My concern is that if you're going to be putting this in the base for providers, then it's going to be required. You're correct, Eric. It is not required for family daycare providers to do these assessments. It's a lot of time, and I know the fetching providers do these assessments, and it's not even right for them to do it. Someone should be coming in and doing those assessments. There's no time in the day. And I think if you want a fair judgment about assessments, bring in a provider that has to do this, such as Verlinda. She has to do these assessments. It is a lot of time to do. And again, I say, if you're going to put that in the base, it's going to be required for family or home-based providers to do it. There's not enough time in the day to do that for all our kids. So Verlinda, I'm sure she can speak on that. But I hate to see that in the base. Thank you.
Thanks, Deborah. Donna?
So I agree actually with what Deborah is saying. I'm not sure expecting providers to do this on site is reasonable. We at CCRC, we used to do developmental screenings prior to a lot of the funding reductions. We did it as part of our alternative payment funding on every child in the program. And we've been longtime advocates that should just be part of what we're doing, looking for ways to do more and more of it again as we try to, look for different funding. But I think that there are ways to build this in. I'm not so sure. We've talked a little bit about the base rate for the providers, but I think you have to think about your infrastructure supports as well, and what could be done in a systemic way, consistently. And I think contracted centers are different, but especially when you're looking at a provider who may have one or two children who are paid for with state reimbursement, how can we better align and do this in an efficient way, I guess is the way I'm saying it. But
Virginia?
Can you hear me?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, perfect. So going back to the piece around supporting children with disabilities, curious if you can share more about how and whether you're factoring in staffing for a para to support a child or children with IEPs.
So right now, go ahead. Right now, the idea is that it's not linked to whether or not a child is diagnosed and receiving services under an IEP or an IFSP alone, that's not the only determiner of those additional inclusion supports. So it is not, we could include, if a child had an IEP, then there's additional expenses that could be paid for by another source, right? So then it becomes about the understanding the total cost, but also acknowledging that those costs may not be paid for by only the subsidy funding system, but you're layering in other funding like Part B or Part C. The model can function that way. This inclusion support in this table is not assuming that an IEP or an IFSP pays for those dollar amounts. It's instead putting in that childcare base rate.
Okay, and then just the other comment, since there was this conversation about the DRDP, wanting to echo that, this is a Title V requirement. It's a Title V requirement in CSPP for both centers and for family childcare home education networks. And they're supposed to be doing the DRDP together with the provider, since the provider is the one that's with the children every day. So really wanting to echo, how do we build in that cost? And I think that brings us to the larger question of how are we building in the cost generally for Title V? But that one is a key one that we'd really want to make sure there's support for.
We hear you. I was sort of seeing, I'll be frank with all of you. I'm sort of seeing it in two phases. We have a July 6th deadline for the model, which is related to the August deadline. And the model is a functioning base that can have all of the Title V requirements in it, and you can run scenarios for those. It's what point in time do we run those, right? And how the model functions. So we have much of the Title V regs, and I know, Virginia, you said that CDE was going to be confirming some of the values that were in the chart last week so that we can then integrate those into the model that we're building for the July 6th deadline. So that's a little bit why there's sort of amounts in here, and some places they're linked to Title V, and then some places it sort of tails off a little and doesn't specifically call it. So we can keep finalizing those in the next 2 weeks. For Linda.
Hello, everyone. Excuse me, I'm a little bit under the weather. The DRDPs is one is stressful. Two, doing them even with is a lot of work. They have 24 children. We have up to 14 children. And that's a lot of paperwork to try to sit there and complete at a certain deadline. I just asked today, when is the new, what's the timeline for the new DRDPs for 22, 23? And they told me they don't know just yet. But then here come October and November, then it's like, oh, hurry up, do them, and then hurry up and do a parent conference. That is too much to do that for all 14 or 24 children. And for a family child care provider to have to be responsible for that, it is a lot with all the administrative and the overhead and making sure that all the other paperwork is in line with license compliance and everything. That's a lot of work. And I'm stuck in as a LCC provider. I'm talking about also as a substitute teacher working in the LA County of Los Angeles and working. That is very stressful. Teachers and them are taking them home, the deadlines. So the kids, there's a lot of paperwork that needs to be held up or structured a different way or some other kind of way. But and the coaches, they don't help family LCCs. You're giving them the money and they don't help us. So that's a problem. Thank you. And thank you for listening to me.
Thank you, Verlinda.
Thank you, Workgroup members, for your input. And Gina, if it's okay with you, I think we maybe could pause at this point for a 10-minute break. So it is 10:08. We will see you all back at 10:18 to continue the presentation from P5. Thank you. Welcome back, everyone. I see folks returning. Appreciate your prompt return. I think we are ready to get back started. I will hand it over to you, Gina.
Hi, everyone. Sorry, Krista, I was trying to follow the questions in the chat too. So at the same time, trying to see if I could get the file.
Yeah, we had a couple work group members wanting to follow along. So if you could just clarify, Gina, what you're sharing today, is this what we shared with the work group for the meeting on June 15th?
June 17th, the last Friday meeting.
Sorry,
it is a next version of that, yes, with their input integrated into it. So it's the same frame as the June 17th meeting. There's additional details put into it based on the discussion that the group had.
Great, thank you. If you or Katie could please send that to me, and then we will get it forwarded out to the work group.
No problem.
Mama, there's 2 things.
So we're going to move on to.
I have to say to you, Mama's kind of bad. Mama's kind of that's.
We're having like a live action moment where, thanks, Gina, you are juggling real kids and real work. So you're doing it very well. So
she just came home from camp. So that's why there was like a moment. And it's unfortunate she didn't come home right before the break ended. She came in right after the break. So she didn't know. She just missed the window to get to say hello.
Deborah, I saw your hand up. Did you have a clarifying question before we get back started?
Yeah, if you don't mind, and I love your daughter. I think that's beautiful. It's the reality, and she should prop up a chair and sit and chat. So before we all get started and everything, I just wanted to say really quick, the truth of the matter, if I understand why we're here today in this forum, but you have to also understand that this platform also allows questions to be asked and questions to be answered. And because of this opportunity, doesn't happen for us educators, especially as home-based educators. So I have a question for Virginia. And thank you, Verlinda, when you brought up what you said about veteran providers. Is that my question is, are networks being reimbursed for having DRPDs completed on the children in their networks or in their programs? And if so, why are they requiring that home-based providers complete these DRPDs? And why aren't the networks sending out staff to go to the providers' homes to do this themselves? So that's my question. And know that when I ask this question, Virginia, I'm asking this with the support and the conversations of network providers throughout this state. And so again, this platform is real. It's an opportunity to ask questions and have them answered when we're not able to do this on a regular basis. So I just wanted to, Virginia, at one point, you can just take that opportunity and answer it. Later, I have no problem with that. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that question, Deborah. I'm trying to find the statute right now that talks about it, so I don't have that immediately to my fingers. I will say after the rate changes that were effective January 1st, all state preschool sections should be on the regional market rate. However, the difference is that the way that family childcare home education networks are funded is that the entire rate, the contract rate, goes to the fetch-in contractor, who takes off a percentage before it goes to the provider. And it makes sense because the fetch-in contractor has work that they have to do. They need to pay, their own staff. But then what ends up going to the provider is not the full regional market rate. And so the amount that a provider that's part of a state preschool fetch-in has to do things like work with the network on the DRDP is less than say, a family child care home provider that's not required to meet the DRDP. So that's something that, we've definitely raised as part of that implementation. And we think it's really critical to have addressed to make sure that the admin rate that the fetchins get is on top of the rate so that the family child care home provider is getting the full rate. And so that may be something that this work group is able to address, and just wanting to flag that.
Thank you so much for that, because yes, they're not fairly being reimbursed at all. And I think that it would be a really great idea is to bring in those fetching providers and get their input on what's really going on, how they feel about this, if it's inequitable or not, because there are some unfair practices here. And I think the voices of those fetching providers has to and now be heard throughout this state. It's time. It's time. It's time. Thank you.
Thank you, Deborah. Donna, please go ahead.
I just want to follow up. What Virginia said is not true for all fetchins. It's only for those who have had an SRR-based contract historically. My agency has run a fetchin since the mid-90s in an RMR model, and the provider is paid the full RMR rate. And we have tried to run legislation 3 times unsuccessfully to fix this problem. So if we could fix it here, that would be great. But there are a lot of things that need to get cleaned up. The administering agency has responsibilities that need to be consistent across all administering agencies, which I would say also should include doing the DRDP. And there are things that need to get fixed. So I just want to be clear that it's not all fetch-in contracts that are run that way. And we have these inequities across contracts.
Can I just respond to that really quick to add clarity? I know, Verlinda, you have your hand up, but wanted to just add, thank you, Donna, for that. So I think it's important to remember that our system is complex. That's part of what's motivating many of us to be on this group. So we actually have 4 different fetch-in contract types. There's the California State Preschool Program, or CSPP fetch-in contract type. There's the General Child Care fetch-in contract type, which is the CCTR acronym. And then there's the CMIG, or the Migrant fetch-in contract, which is CMIG. Those 3 were all formerly on the standard reimbursement rate, and at least my understanding of all 3 of them, although I can only speak with great surety about the CDE programs, is that those are the ones where essentially the provider doesn't get the full rate. Because the fetch-in gets the rate, takes a percentage off, and then it goes to the provider what's left. The 4th fetch-in contract type is confusingly named Family Child Care Home Education Networks, but it's only one of 4 fetch-in contract types. It's the CFCC fetch-in contract type. And that one was historically on the RMR and is funded a little bit different. So that one there is administrative funding at the network level, and the providers get the full RMR. So really wanting to tease out for us a little bit some of the inequities just across those 4 contract types, where one fetch-in contract type is, the family child care home provider is getting the full amount, whereas the other 3 are not getting the full amount. And then when we come to things like looking at the DRDP, some are going to have more money for that than others. And so how do we address that?
Thank you, Virginia, and thank you also for clarifying what fetch-in stands for. Verlinda will take your comment, and then we will return back to Jeannie to complete the P5 presentation. Please go ahead, Verlinda.
Hello, everyone, again. since we're all here and everything that we've been doing and everything has been transparent, when it comes down to the fetching programs, can that be transparent also and not hidden and hard to find when you need to get resources? Because a lot of things are being told to providers and then finding out later that it's not true, or because providers are in tune with other fetching programs, they all don't run the same. So I think that it should be transparent to providers and them who are with them, so they have access to that information, so they have a ground to stand on instead of being left out here with no voice. Thank you.
Thank you, Verlinda. Gina, back to you.
Okay, thanks. So we're going to take a quick look at compensation. Before I share again, I just want to tee us up for where we came from last week. We had some brief discussion about compensation. One of the things that we are acknowledging as part of all of the data collection of this process, frankly, sort of every single piece of data that we have pulled in, and we've pulled a fair amount in by this point, even as the survey is open and we're still waiting to be able to synthesize the survey. All of the information that we've captured or looked at across other data sources speaks to the idea of current compensation, or sort of actual compensation that folks are reflecting now. In some instances where we have numbers that show below the minimum wage requirements in the state or community, some of the information is 2 years old because of when it was collected. So we are acknowledging that when it comes to compensation, and this is something that came up a little bit in last week's meeting, is that we are not about building a model that is putting in the current wages because of understanding how deeply impacted those current wages are by the funding and payment dynamic that providers experienced for now several decades, and that we need to be looking forward and addressing this issue of more of a living wage. So that's what I would want to talk about today, with looking at some of the data points related to that, bringing it together. And part of what I'm asking you for is an endorsement of using the living wage approach in how we build out the cost model to include compensation. So that'll make a little more sense when we look at the chart together here in a second. Okay. Okay, so we're back at the bottom of that chart that we have just gone through everything except for compensation. And so what we're going to take a look at is just one county example. I want to give you a little bit more context on the work that we are doing, partnering with our colleagues at Berkeley around the workforce study and pulling in, as I mentioned, lots of other data sources. So we have pulled the Bureau of Labor Statistics, which is BLS on this chart, which is the federal source that maintains salary information for hundreds of job classifications, including childcare, preschool programming, school-based programming. We have pulled for every single Bureau of Labor Statistics or BLS region in the state of California. We then mapped those to the 5 regions that the workforce study used for thinking about the early care and education workforce and the way that data was gathered. So we've been able to then look at those federal Bureau of Labor Statistics data on compensation and compare it to or lay it next to the workforce study by doing regions in that way. We then also will pull in, and there's a column there that doesn't have anything in it yet. We will be pulling in the cost of quality survey data and aligning it to the workforce study regions as well. We want to really hang to those 5 regions. We're only sharing one piece of this right now because what we are looking at, and as I said, sort of as the outset, what I'm really looking for is for us to think about this idea of the living wage approach for the model and endorsing that then we go and apply this approach across all of those other regions. So we're just looking at one region. We're not unpacking all of the dollar amounts on this chart so much as the concept. But there are a few things that I do want to reinforce. We took the Los Angeles County example. It is a county in the workforce study. It's in the BLS. We're able to align the BLS data to it. And then we're able to use the living wage calculator, which is the gray column, and we're going to talk about in a second at the county level as well. So we're sort of county to county to county. It was a little cleaner to bring you an example today from using LA County as the base. part of what I wanted to sort of make sure that we all take a moment and look at here is acknowledging that current compensation information that we have available to us, or I should say salary or wage, because this is not full compensation. This is just related to annual salary amounts. And so for that first column, you see pulling from the most recent BLS or Bureau of Labor Statistics data, what the positions that line up the most closely to, if not exactly the way the positions are described, to a director, an assistant director, and a lead teacher and assistant teacher in a childcare program. That's the values that you see. I want to note a couple things related to this. So if we look at the assistant teacher, that $34,000 amount, that's $16 an hour roughly for a full-time position. The teacher is $20 an hour. If we then, and you see things that are really not very different from the workforce study, which is the second column. The abbreviation CSCCE is the center at Berkeley that did the workforce study. I'll leave it to Leah to put out the acronym in the chat for me to make sure I get it accurate, but so that we're not dealing in acronyms. But then you'll have the full name of the center. The center data is about a year behind the BLS data, just point in time when it was captured. So it really isn't that far off from the same information for those same positions that was gathered or that you can find looking at the BLS or that first column. So again, reinforcing that we're talking about folks that are coming in at 16 or less an hour, $20 or less an hour. One of the things that was referenced, and more than one place has chose to do this, to use the MIT has a living wage calculator. There's a lot of variables to how that calculator works, and it includes things like understanding whether or not it's a single parent of one child, a single parent of 2 or 3 children, 2 married or 2 individuals who are both working with multiple children. There's a lot of different things you have to select to use the calculator. And so we've ran some different scenarios in the calculator in order to be able to sort of really understand sort of that disparity between current wages or what the workforce is currently experiencing across California, using LA County as our example, and what living wages for that same region of the state is actually saying that an individual needs to be at to be earning a living wage. And to give you a sort of point of reference, we start with the assistant teacher. That's the lowest salary point on that living wage calculator range, starting at $62,000. That is the equivalent to $29 an hour. So what they're saying in the living wage calculator is that an individual in Los Angeles County needs to be earning $21 an hour to be earning a living wage in that community. And right now, in reality, that same position is making closer to $16 an hour. So this is where a lot of our work on moving a rate to fair compensation rests, because so much of the rate is based on the salary and compensation of the individuals that work in or own the programs. And so that's why I wanted to share that sort of looking at them in that kind of somewhat stark way to see that there's the reality, and we know the reality is not good. And as I said, the reality in some instances is actually below your minimum wage. Then there's also, with a living wage calculator that's working on this idea of what it actually costs to live in a place in your state, what an individual needs to make. And so the recommendation or the idea had been put forward at our last meeting, I think it was, last Friday, was the idea of using the living wage calculator. And the reason you see ranges there are because there's some decision points to be made, right? There's some around this idea. We know as an early childhood workforce that there are lots of women with children. There are lots of single parents that work in the early childhood workforce compared to other industries. So we want to make sure we build the selections in the living wage calculator that sort of more accurately represents the composition of the workforce. And that's another data point that the workforce study can help us with, because there were questions around how many children the individuals in the workforce study that responded to it had, whether they were single parent, 2-income household, those sorts of questions that actually help us to make better use of the calculator. So that's why we're putting a range here for you. But I thought that it was important that we start the discussion and that you see the direction that we're headed in employing the living wage calculator to be the foundation for our compensation approach, starting with that assistant teacher and then sort of going up from there to the other positions within the salary structure. But just to give you another frame of reference for the Los Angeles example, the sort of lowest living wage, the lowest hourly living wage that the calculator generates is a single person working, no children. And that is at $21 an hour. So even there, if we took that lowest, we are talking about over $5 more than what is the current rate that employees in childcare programs are making. So we know that the living wage is helping us with that North Star. We know that there's also some room even for growth within how you apply the living wage. And what, as part of sharing this with you today, wanted to sort of get that endorsement that we continue down this path of mapping and using the living wage calculator as supporting compensation that is better than the current compensation that providers are receiving. So I'm going to pause. I know that's a lot. See what folks' immediate reactions are. Go ahead, Robin.
Hello. I don't recall saying we wanted to use the living wage. I was recalling at the beginning if we could find out what kinder teachers make. I always, in my 38 years, have advocated that our lead teachers should at least be on par with kinder teachers. And so obviously if they don't make between 74 and 94, then I never said this, but if they make more, I would rather use that. And if we do the living wage calculator, does that mean every county is going to have a different rate?
Well,
so Robin, can I interject here? Because I think this was discussed at the meeting, the last meeting, where we had talked about more of the reference. So what we were using as the example was 3 meetings ago, the reference to how New Mexico created a reference to the floor being the minimum wage. And this group responded by saying that was too, and that the concept of living wage came up as what the reference should be to how we look at this. So not having a minimum wage reference, but having a living wage reference. And that's what's been translated here. So that's why I think that's how this is being shown in the cost model right now.
There's a few other pieces related to the kinder teacher. One, there's in many instances, they are coming in lower than living wages in their regions as well. So that's one. And then the other is that there's a lot of data points to pull in when you look at, say, Los Angeles County has 83 school districts. So there's not having it at a more county level. Then we have to pull, do we pull from all 83 and do an average of them, right? There's a lot of sort of subjective elements to that. What is the kinder salary in a given area? As far as the approach to currently how we're building the regional, we are taking it and rolling it. This happens to be a county because this county is one of the 5 regions in the workforce study. So this just happens to be that Los Angeles County is a county sample in the workforce study. The other 4 regions are bigger regions than counties. So we're not necessarily moving towards a county-based approach to it. We are actually in line with the 5 regions from the workforce study is how we're thinking about it right now. But we could also break that down if you needed to at future points in the process.
Berlinda, I see your hand. Please go ahead.
Hello. My question is when we come up with these figures, are we making it across the board so LCCs have an equal opportunity to hire these staff and everything? So there won't be, well, if I get the centers over here is being paying a little bit more, we're going to go there. So then our doors are still be closed. Are we going to make this equal so we have all be on the same kind of equal playing field?
It's a great question, Berlinda, and it speaks a little bit to sort of the asterisk there. The way that we approach it in modeling, as we've talked about before, is we do assign a salary to the owner provider of family childcare settings. And that is something that there needs to be some discussion about where that salary gets pinned to. Frequently, we will pin it to either the lead teacher, the assistant director, or the director, or a proportion of one of those three. And then we also pin the assistant position in a family childcare, match it to the assistant teacher position in the center. So it would be the same, whatever comes out of the living wage calculator, it would be in the model for the family childcare on par with what it is in the center.
Thank you.
Thank you, Verlinda. Deborah, please go ahead.
Thank you. So with the living wage, I'm sitting there thinking, and I don't know how this works, but how often is the living wage adjusted? Because especially what's going on right now, I mean, hey, we would need an increase if we were on a living wage. I just need an understanding. How often is that living wage adjustment? Does it calculate, or if we had a living wage and as inflation is going up right now, how is that going to be built back in? Is there,
Yeah.
I think $21 in LA County, I'm thinking, where are they living? So thank you.
So that speaks a lot to the maintenance of the model, right? Once you have the model, once you establish your sort of baseline of what your salary is drawing from, or the reference point, as Janelle referred to it, then there's the keeping up of the model. We take a couple different approaches, and we support states to think about an approach that really sort of blends, just like building the model, blends more than one data source together to make a decision each year. There's some years, this would not be one of them. You might just go with a more of sort of a cost of living or a consumer price index increase of, like, say, a 3%, and apply that to all the salaries so that they're going up. Obviously, in high inflation years, you need to think about those other inputs and really make sure that salaries are keeping up with the other inflation issues. So that's why we recommend that places pull in more than one source and then make a call, but you don't start with a model in 22 and never raise salaries. Otherwise, your model is woefully out of date, right? You have to update it. You have to annually be updating. And if you don't actually update your model annually, then when we support states, or when they talk to us about when they do update it, they go back and update it, pulling it up to current, even if they don't actually do it every year. But for the most part, everybody updates their model every year so they can be answering really live point in time questions around cost and understanding how much has cost increased since the last time we used the model to help us understand cost. So you want to keep it up to date. It's helpful.
You're right on point when you said pulling it up to current, because as we know, the RMR is 2018 and we're in 2022. So we have to make sure that doesn't happen in this model. Thank you.
Leah, I'm hopeful that I was going to follow up with your question in the chat, but I'm hoping you'll voice it because I wanted to make sure I understood it before I tried to answer. So Leah, go ahead.
Yeah, sorry, there's a lot in my background today, so I'm trying not to come off mute. So yes, I'm just wondering if you could speak, Gina, to the distinction between a wage floor and how the living wage would get used to establish a floor, or a minimum that we're saying somebody should be paid, and then how we scale up from there and how the model accounts for that. And I guess really part of my question in that is this example here, is that what we're talking about? Are we talking about the floor, not benchmark, kind of top salaries at living wage?
Yeah, good question, and an important piece of understanding sort of what we've mapped even as a starting point to understanding how we would use the living wage calculator. So we do begin with the lowest paid position in the program, a teaching position in the program. So the assistant teacher position in most of these instances, it fits very much with the living wage calculator because the living wage calculator doesn't distinguish the role of the position, what the qualifications are or what the expertise is required or any of those things. It's really just saying, in order to live in this community, here's how much you need to make an hour. So it really lines up well with being the starting place with the assistant teacher. We then take a couple different cuts at how to then scale up from there for the other positions, right? In all the salary data the workforce study, the BLS data, our survey results will see the same thing, that there is a relationship between the teacher assistant, the teacher, the assistant director, the director, right? And so we look at those proportional differences in salaries that are currently in place, and we look at them across more than one source to see if there is some consistency. Do we see that a lead teacher typically is making about 20% more than an assistant teacher? And that supports us to then build the ladder of the next position. So because the living wage calculator wouldn't make sense to, you can't take it and convert it to a director, you're going to end up with the director should make 62,000 because it's not distinguishing the idea of different responsibilities within a program. There's obviously some judgment within that, and every place that I've worked with gets better at refining this, more data from programs, more thinking about what do I need to hire people at, which is different than what I currently am able to pay them, right? Because again, what I'm currently able to pay them is very much driven by my current revenues. So as the more we gather that sort of data on understanding, like how much more does a director typically make or need to make in order to attract and retain people to do those jobs, that helps us to break those things out. But we try to end up with a pretty strong approach to the percentage differences. And then we apply that starting with that. And that's what we did here, applied it starting with that assistant teacher as the base amount and going up from there.
Don't touch my computer.
Other questions?
I don't see any more hands up. Gina, please go ahead.
Well, no, this is it. This is the whole part of wrapping us up as a group together is discussion of this. This is the last piece of, and obviously all can relate, this is the biggest piece of the cost model. So what, as I said at the outset, I'm bringing this to you with an understanding of how we're suggesting that we employ the calculator, and we will then be mapping this out across all the other 4 regions, and then doing some additional refinement once we're able to, as I said, the cost of quality survey is not closing until next week. So we're going to be doing some fast footwork on data analysis we're already at 4,300 responses in the survey. And we hope that with a little bit last push that that's going to grow even again in the next few days. So there'll be more data that we're pulling into it, but I wanted you to know the direction that we're headed. All right, so that got us some more hands. Robin?
Of course it did, right? My question was actually about the survey. So the survey is the reality of what's happening on the ground. And then there's also a question though, what is the ideal rate in that survey?
Yep.
And so what are we going to do with that information? For example, in my ideal, I put the rate that the teachers make at East LA Community College Child Care Center, which is higher than the living wage. So what are we going to do with that information that we get?
We're going to pull that in, and we've heard a very robust feedback on that one through the input session. So because that's a question that's really engaged in the model input discussions that we've had across the state. So we've already been hearing some of that feedback even outside of whether folks have completed that one or how they've completed it in the survey. So we'll pull that in as further benchmarking for whether or not how the living wage calculator is being used fits, if it's in line with what we're hearing. So we'll do analysis of it and look at it across the regions. And that'll guide us to be able to say, okay, maybe not enough, right? And to make a judgment call on that. Deborah?
Thank you. So I'm looking at this and I see paid sick leave to be included in the base for home-based educators. But then I have to step back and say, wait a minute, but the state does not reimburse or pay providers for paid sick leave, which providers are wanting. that PTO in there. So I would think this would be a great place for the state to step back and think, you know what? You're right. It should be a net base, and we should be paying the home-based providers PTO time. So I thank you for putting that in there. And this is a great example of why we should have that in there. And state, let's consider it, and let's go ahead and include it, and we'll be expecting it. Thank you.
So one note on that, Deborah, is that how the model works, right, is it pulls in the expense of paid sick leave and then turns it into an output of cost per child. And then what states do is they take that cost per child and then translate that to their rates and have that help them inform their rate setting. So it's not as literal as saying that a provider is paid for paid sick leave. It's that the rate accounts for the fact that in doing business and running a program, there needs to be paid sick leave. So it's there, right? But it's not handing it to someone in that same way. It's giving them the rate that includes it.
Yes, thank you. I'm just excited to see it. Thank you.
I'm excited to hear excitement about the model. Virginia, go ahead.
Sorry, trying to. Okay, sorry about that. Just wondering, I think it might be helpful for the work group, and I'm sorry if I missed this, so I've already said this. Just to hear, like, of the folks that have already responded to the survey, what's the breakdown in program? So, like,
Hey, Virginia, you're breaking up on us a bit. Is there a microphone that you can change to? We've all turned into our own IT support here as we live in the Zoom-based universe. There we go. Excellent.
How about this? Sorry, I accidentally hung up the phone audio just as I started talking. I was just saying, I'll just repeat my whole question. So, and I apologize if this is something you shared, but maybe it'd be helpful even if you shared it to repeat it again, Gina. But for the responses that you have gotten so far to the survey, maybe if you could break out sort of who's represented there. And sort of the simplest would be like the number of family child care home providers, the number of centers, the number of licensed exempt family friend and neighbors. But if there's more breakdown, I think maybe that would be helpful. I know I'm kind of putting you on the spot, but I think it's helpful for this group and the public to understand sort of where we're at right now, and then if we need to do more pushes to get more responses.
So we are actually going to be doing a cut for the CCPU members and staff around family, childcare, and FFN and geographic outreach. We're going to be getting that over to them actually this afternoon so that they can do a push right now. So I'll definitely be able to have sort of a little bit better on the idea of analysis. Because at this point, it really does come down to a little bit more of geographic and type of provider, right? Like, so who's then the right entity to reach out and do a push if we want to increase the numbers? And that's why we want to get that information for CCPU to do that with their members for family, friend, and neighbor and family childcare. But just to give you sort of a very, very quick, because you're right. It is a little on the spot. I didn't have it ready for this meeting, and it is actively open as a survey. So, take all of those things with a bit of a grain of salt for me. But as percentage-wise, we actually have more percentage-wise of family childcares that have completed the survey than center-based settings. The lowest number percentage-wise is family, friend, and neighbor care settings, which we knew was something that really had to be a more targeted push because of just the nature of that they're not coming through all the same systems or in the same way, or they may not see themselves in the system in the same way. But we have about, of the response rates, 10% more of them are from family childcare overall than center-based settings. So we could definitely do some push to our center-based settings. And I don't have additional breakdown on what type of funding sources to answer the question on Title V or not. It's really just at that most global center versus FCC. But I can try to pull that and see where that is for early, like by Monday, so that we'd be able to maybe follow up with CCTR and CSPP providers or all Title V providers.
I think that would be really helpful, Gina, because when we look at the data of the children that are served in subsidized programs, family childcare is a big swath, but centers is a really big swath too. And I want to make sure that our responses are representative of where subsidized children are served. And obviously, the bigger sample we get, the better our data. So when we look at the data from state preschools, mostly centers. But when we look at the data from before the transition, that's still on the CD's website, 55% of the children that CDE supported before the transition were served in centers. So how do we make sure that for such an important, for all of our settings, right, that we are getting the word out and people are filling these out, but especially we want to make sure that we're really doing a push to get representative answers. So, and that applies for everything, right? So hearing that we have a higher percentage of family childcare home responses, that's great. I'm glad we have so many responses. I hope we get more. But what can we do to get more on the center side? Because we certainly don't want, we want usable data. So we don't end up having this conversation over again because we didn't get everything that we could have. So I think, CD sent another reminder email. I know that we've got the public on this call. I know we've got a number of other folks too that have their own networks. And so just wanting to sort of call everyone to sort of what can we do to get representative responses in the next week.
And also do remember that there's the input sessions and then there's also some one-on-one interviews that are going on, especially with sites that have 21 or more locations, which are often centers. And so those are going to be put into the survey tool as well. So it's really not just the survey as far as input, and more centers have been participating in the input sessions. We have had family childcares, but it's on, if we just kind of like quick and dirty thinking about who's come to the input sessions, we probably are more like 60 to 70% of them center reps compared to about 30% family childcare. So there's more than one thing that's coming together, giving us input into the data. All right, Eric.
Thank you for clarifying that, Gina. I think we may want to do another public awareness campaign on that option for center-based that have multiple sites they're reporting on, those input sessions, because I think there's still some disconnect in the field, that there's some reticence for a Title V contractor with multiple locations to fill out that survey almost like a single owner center versus an individual agency with multiple locations. So those input sessions, or if there's another way to respond to the survey from multiple locations, is there a different type of communicate that, or a way we can set that aside? Because I think that is a little bit of a murky area, especially for a lot of the center-based contractors, because they're looking at this survey and they're going, well, it's a great survey. I want to fill it out, but I can't do it 22 times.
Right. Yeah, so just direct them to us and we set up one-on-one interviews, and then we really focus on the items that need to be taken. We don't fill it out 21 times with them. We focus on, let's talk about salary schedule. Let's talk about, sort of global information on occupancy. We take the big buckets of cost.
Thank you.
So one thing, I don't see any other hands up. So one thing that I would like to do while folks are, if you're working on any other questions, is really check in on this idea of the recommended approach to applying the living wage calculator, sort of, I guess, poll, for lack of a better term for it, to ensure that that it's the direction that the work group feels comfortable with. There was some discussion, and then it kind of trailed off, does that mean agreement? Where does that leave us with folks? You could use your real thumb. You could use your Zoom thumb. You could come off and tell me that you don't agree. But I need some sense of where we are. Robin?
I would just go back to it depends. I would like to see the survey results. I would like to see what folks put as the ideal. And then also the county. So, the county living wage it's different by county. So for me, my vote would be it depends.
Okay. One thing I can tell you from our experience with data collection on the ideal from individuals is that frequently all we hear is $1 or $2 more an hour because people are not in a mindset of what real hourly needs to be. They're just like hanging on. If I could pay someone $2 more, maybe they wouldn't have left, which we're beyond $2 more, right, as a thought process. So I'm not sure that everyone is like the way you thought about your survey of pinning it to something that is really a sort of a much, much higher salary in the region.
Them to me, and I'll help them fill out that section.
Well, this is where it's important that the model sets a North Star, right? And kind of pushes so that we can get out of that scarcity mindset. Eric?
Gina, based upon what was done in other states, was the living wage calculator kind of the North Star, or was there a different North Star set in other states?
So the District of Columbia, let's just stick with the two that have used it for rate setting most recently, and our state-based approach versus localities. They actually had their own living wage. Then they established, and so very similar concept, they just didn't happen to use the MIT one, and then they passed it as their basically their district minimum wage instead of actually having a minimum wage. So yes, they are following that living wage approach. They've also done comparisons to parity, DC public schools parity, right? They've had all of those sorts of like comparisons across because they're like the grandparents. They've done this 3 times. So they're in a slightly different stage too. But when they first started, it was, we know minimum wage is not high enough. We want to raise the bar. And then next time around, they passed living wage. So they, if you look back at the beginning, they were at a very similar point of trying to find a North Star and pin to that North Star. In New Mexico, because they were in the middle of a minimum wage ordinance that was taking their minimum wage from the federal, say $7 an hour to more like $10 an hour. And then they have an area of the state that is at $12 an hour minimum wage. That was more of a sort of living wage for them. Now, New Mexico is a place that 75% of children under 5 years of age live below the federal poverty line. So we have to acknowledge the context of the income profile of the whole state when we think about this, right? So that minimum wage in the highest minimum wage area of New Mexico was more of like a living wage for them as a state. They also said, that they wanted to go next round, it's going to be $15 an hour instead of 12, and next round it's going to be 18. They set that goal, and the governor is in support of that goal. So they know they want to go beyond it, but as a first pass from $7 an hour to 12, that was a significant leap as that entry point in the assistant position. So very similar, just plays out a little differently because of context, but it's still the idea of we can't just say we need 50 cents more an hour, right? It's still that idea of trying to find something that is more of a North Star. Donna?
Yeah, so I'm supportive of using the living wage as part of that framework that we're setting. And I don't know that it's mutually exclusive that it has to be minimum wage or teacher salary, because we're looking at a whole range of positions. So it is part of that strategic framework to use the living wage as part of our benchmark setting. And then as we build in the different levels of teaching, directors, those types of things, that'll all be factored on that, but starting with the living wage makes a whole lot more sense to me than starting at minimum wage, because that is not adequate, and we know that. So I support this direction. And I also, the teaching salaries vary quite a bit from district to district throughout the state. So regardless of which benchmark you would use, you're still going to have that variance from district to district or county to county. But we've got to start somewhere. So this makes sense to me.
Thanks, Tom. And so often can be driven by economic circumstance of a community too, in school district. So we have to be careful that we don't replicate those inequities, right? So it's feeling like folks are in support of the living wage overall with some, but I still want to see more, which is pretty much exactly where we are. There's going to be more. And I think Janelle's ready to hop in and talk a little bit about timeline, which supports that idea of like, well, when more? And July 6th is our big moment with the model where you'll see numbers and all of this sort of functioning together. It doesn't mean it's done in the sense of that's it. There'll never be any, we always talk about sort of initial results using the model together and then continue to refine it. And even between July 6th and probably July 12th, there'll be some refinement to it, or we're expecting it after we meet at that meeting. So I think that we can adhere to that idea of it depends, and I want to see more. I think we can meet both of those as part of using the living wage too.
Thanks, Gina. And I think, thank you everyone for the robust conversation. I think this is exactly, we're at a level of detail that I think when we started this process, we all wanted to get to, and now we're there, and the ability to make these references and, think about benchmarks. And I think one of the things we're going to have to go forward from here is, as we see some of these numbers, is asking ourselves, how do we start to think about the implementation phases? How do we start thinking about, if we have a benchmark, are we looking at a system where we start to close gaps towards benchmark as the staging? And I think this aligns with the initial rate reform group that said, let's start to, take progressive, proportionate steps in closing those gaps. Let's make sure that we're holding harmless. So it's not about a reduction. It's about how you get to increases in the system and taking some of those stages. So as we think about this and start to see more of the, I'll say the framework, the numbers that go with it, the ways we'll also want to come back to, are there ways that you see this being implemented to make sure that we're also attending to having decisions made that are both within our space, but also outside of our space, and making sure that we can proceed with completeness as we work to make this transition. So I'm going to bring up the timeline that was all sent to you and giving a sense of, well, what's happened, what's next, and then so you can all be thinking about the upcoming weeks and where we're headed here. So Carla, do you want to take over here and talk through the timeline, or do you want me to proceed?
Let me cover three really quick things on the timeline for folks. So this is the work we've done, and happy to have Janelle share more, but want to really spend time on the green areas. So as we scroll down, you see three components. You will receive several drafts of the report, and you've all received a really comprehensive one on the recommendations, and we're collecting your feedback. It's changing components of the framework and the recommendations, but three sections in this timeline, and you all have it. First, there are components of the report that you all have asked for and want specific short papers that will be incorporated as an appendix. Those three, you should have received some parts of it. We're still incorporating feedback, and then you will receive them again or new versions of it by July 1st. So just keeping an eye out for some of the information that you've asked for. And then if we scroll, let's see, July 7th through 18th, the piece here is exactly what Gina was discussing. So in the draft report, you will not see a comprehensive overview of the methodology or the cost model, because we are waiting for the survey to close, and our researchers, P5, is going to then present the cost model. We're going to spend July 6th just on the cost model based on all the input that you've been giving May and June specifically. Timelines to consider here. So after P5 presents the cost model on July 6th, From the 7th to the 11th, they will be reaching out to work group members individually, and if you so choose to meet with them or not. But that sort of window of July 7th through 11th on providing input on the cost model itself. And then the written product of what those recommendations look like based on that cost model will come out July 12th. And from the 12th to the 18th, if the work group can focus specifically on that section. There's other components of the report, but because there's been so much interest in the cost model, what it looks like, and questions, we want to make sure that you understand you will not see it in the initial draft, but rather will come out as a separate component of the report. Let me pause there for any questions on that. If not, I'll move to the third section. Okay. For the third section, and this one is the really, really critical component. This, you will receive 2 additional drafts of the report. On July 8th, you will receive a comprehensive draft number 2. And you will have from the 8th through the 20th to provide feedback and feedback in writing. And then also Nancy Stroll, who's been a strategic advisor to the work group, has met with many of you already. We'll be reaching out one-on-one if you prefer to give your feedback verbally, and it will be captured. WestEd will incorporate that information into the report, but that time period of July 8th through the 20th will be the most comprehensive feedback that we hope to get from you all, so that on August 5th, you will get the final draft with all information incorporated into it. On August 5th, the turnaround time for any final comments that you may have will be much shorter, because the hope is that from the 12th to the 18th, we have the most input from you all. And you have all this in writing, but just wanted to give you an overview of that. In between, we were really fortunate to have a lot of members of the public join us, provide public comment, and be able to participate in these meetings. So right in the middle of the chart, you will see that from July 12th through the 18th, we are asking for public comment and have set an email where folks that are listening in, if they want to offer any feedback on the report, recommendations come from the work group, but that feedback from the public based on what they've heard will be collected during that time period. And then finally, our last meeting will be August 12th. That's when we will review the final report together. We had discussed having a meeting in person, and we know that some of you have expressed COVID rates have gone up, so the idea of traveling is still up in the air for some folks, and we will discuss whether or not folks want to meet in person on August 12th, but we hope that by having these comprehensive drafts, there will be, we will have a discussion on final report during that last meeting. Any questions on those updates regarding review of the report? Yes, Deborah.
Hello again, thank you. On the public comments, and how are we going to be getting that the email address to the public to make sure that they're able to, to give that feedback? So how are you going to get that word out to the public that they're able to do that besides here on this platform?
Thank you, Deborah. As we send out the agenda, we provide that information to a pretty wide listserv. Some is WestEd, CDE, CDSS. So the state has been getting that information out. And then there's a public website where the information will also be posted.
Thank you, Carla.
Thanks, Deborah. All right, Janelle, seeing no other questions, I'll turn it back to you.
Great. Thanks, Carla. So you can see a lot we've done and much is coming together, but it's going to come together fast as we go through the next few weeks and few meetings. So we're looking forward to seeing you next on July 6th for 2 hours, where again, we'll be able to go through with details on the cost model, and then you'll have your individual feedback, and then we'll be wrapping up the report. So please feel free to be sending us your thoughts to the drafts that you've seen. More will be coming, and we're really looking forward to seeing how this all comes together with you. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Krista to facilitate us through public comment, our final public comment period, and appreciate everyone making, again, time for today and looking forward to our upcoming meetings.
Thank you, Janelle. And thank you so much, everybody. We will open up public comment now. A public chat feature is now open, and we will also be taking verbal public comment. So please, if you'd like to speak verbally, do use the raise hand feature at the bottom of the Zoom screen. And we will give each person 60 seconds to make sure we have time to accommodate a few speakers in our 10 minutes that we have remaining today. And reminder, please state your full name and the organization that you are affiliated with, if relevant. Maria Gomez, I see your hand raised. I invite you to unmute and please go ahead.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Sorry, I've been working in the daycare, so it was hard for me, but I put my ears so I can hear the majority of the stuff. So as a home daycare provider, I said that the RDP I've been doing every day, I think is the best if we as a providers do it, because we're the ones who work with the kids, we know where they are. And the other thing for vacations, if I have a vacation, would I hardly take time off? But there was no way that I would leave my assistant to stay in the daycare when I'm away. For licenses, we are the co-responsible for the daycare. Anything that happens in the daycare, we are responsible, not the assistant provider. The assistant provider can go somewhere else and work. And for us, this is our daycare. This is our business. This is, it will go in our license. And the other thing that I will say, please have us information to have a section with we as a home daycare providers, the ones that were really active, to be involved in these decisions. It is really important, especially because it affects us. And then we know exactly how we work in a daycare. We know what works. We know what doesn't work. The same way that you're doing this section right now, I wish to give us this opportunity for us to work and have something to input more than one person to represent us. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Maria. Rosa, I see your hand raised. Please unmute and go ahead.
Yes, hi, good morning, everybody. I was just making, reading some of the chat comments, and I think what everybody that is in family childcare. So I'm a family childcare provider. I'm also part of a network here of Spanish-speaking providers in the Coachella Valley. And so our concerns are always, what is a livable wage? And of course, looking at some of the models you guys showed today, the MIT does show possibly what could be a base. And I realize, that's a very high base, especially because, we've always been, our salaries have always been lower than even the minimum wage. And I myself don't even have a salary sometimes because I do have to pay for an assistant. And, I wish that it was, I realize that it's hard to put everybody together, but we are a business. We're not just a daycare that doesn't have a license, doesn't have legal fees, all that stuff. So I want you guys to consider that. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Rosa. I don't see any further hands raised, but we do invite you to use that raise hand feature if anyone else would care to offer public comment at this time. Justine, please unmute and go ahead.
Hi, I do agree with Verlinda that, a lot of the subsidy agencies, the fetching programs are not providing us with proper coaching. They do expect us to fill out the paperwork, the DRDPs, the ASQs, et cetera. And then they ask us to submit the information to them while they're collecting a fee for this coaching. I also want to bring up the fact that, how is it expected of a family child care provider to provide dental and vision exams for an infant? Even for center-based dental and a vision exam, they have more rights. They could take these children to the locations can go to them. They have mobile clinics. But for family child care, these clinics are not going to go out for a small quantity of children. So that has to be another factor taken into consideration. And the RNRs are not currently sending children to the family child care providers. That is an inequality. My agency, MAOF, in over a year has not sent me not one child throughout this whole ordeal. And I am one of the reps for the area representing the providers. So I know firsthand if I'm not receiving, others that are reporting are not inaccurate. Thank you.
Thank you, Justine. Barry, I see your hand raised. Please unmute and go ahead.
Hi, good morning. I'm a provider, child care provider with a bilingual curriculum. I'm not prideful, but I'm very happy to be able to offer this to the children. I'm very happy to hear that you guys are working on not just the normal expenses that a provider will have, if we can call it normal, because it's a law, but you guys are considering now the mortgage and bills included in our fees, included in our payments, which is a big thing for us, especially at this time. And I myself appreciate everything you guys have been doing. I've been following every single meeting, 99%, I would say, because I missed a couple. But I hear everyone that speaks on our behalf, and I see a lot of changes. And I just wanted to thank you all for doing it and making sure that we are heard. Thank you. Have a great day.
Thank you, Barry. And it looks like we have Norma and then Maria and Marilyn. Norma, if you could please unmute and go ahead.
Hola, muy buenas tardes. Yo nada más buenos días, perdón.
Good afternoon. I just want to say something interesting for everybody. I think that everybody that I heard was perfect. It will help us a lot. I'm trying to get my license. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
I can do that.
Maria, please go ahead and unmute.
Thank you so much. I just wanted to say that I've been in quality count since 2006, 2007, and I have always the best experience with the coach. It just all depends if you get, together with somebody that you can really work together, but they do work. They have guided me through everything, and then we talk in different times when it's more convenient for me. And I think it all depends that everybody has different experience. But so far for me, it's been one of the best experiences that I have with my coach. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Maria. And Marilyn, please go ahead and unmute and share.
I just wanted to share my thought on the minimum wage. Each cities have their own minimum wage and all businesses have to comply with this wage regulation in their city. So all they need to do is to get into the city website and check on the minimum wage in order to be in compliance with the minimum wage in that city. Also, I would like to say thank you because I saw that we are going to include the the vacation and sick leave. And that is really great. I really appreciate that. I really appreciate to see that. And also raising the wage rate for our employees, teachers, and aides. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Marilyn, and thank you, everyone. We really appreciate your input. We are right at our meeting ending time. We will keep the chat feature open for a few more minutes, so those who do want to enter into the public record in written format are welcome to do so. Thank you to our work group members and members of the public for your attendance and engagement, and we will see you back on July 6th. And a reminder, that meeting is from 8 a.m. until 10 a.m. Thank you all and have a wonderful day.
Record.